something about a good story that grips you to your core. And movies are just stories with pictures on them. And at my house, we love movies. In fact, it seems like a lot of people like movies. There's a huge industry, millions and millions, even billions of dollars on movies. And there's just something about a story. And I believe it's because stories tie into the human condition. In fact, each of our life is a story, tied into a greater story. And if you were to see my wife and I on date night, we like to get, it's hard to get out. We got 4 little kids, so we get a movie on the TV. I'm on the couch, she's on the couch. There's a couple of pillows, and we like to pick the good movies, the ones filled with tension and drama, the ones where you're kind of saying, like, are they going to make it? Are they going to make it? And so you'll notice if you ever watch us watch movies that, the pillows start to get, grabbed up. I'll have some pillows I'm squeezing, she'll have some she's squeezing. If it's a good movie, we were watching one the other day about this guy climbing free solo, climbing without any ropes or anything, climbing up the side of a mountain, and we didn't know if he died or not. We didn't know. I'm thinking, I don't think they would show this if he actually died. And then she was like, well, does he make it? And I'm like, I don't know. And my hands are all sweaty as I'm watching this thing. And here's the thing. My wife, she can't take it. She cannot handle the tension. So what'll happen is, if it's a good movie, you'll see her pick up her phone and begin to Google the ending. Who does that? You do that? After that, it's like, I don't even want to watch the movie anymore. So she'll Google it. I'm like, don't tell me. Or it'll be a real life movie, and so she'll Google the history of how it plays out. And I heard about a guy who did that with books too. He actually got the Harry Potter book when it just came out. He went to the last page, read the last page, and then after he had read the last page, he went to the beginning and read through the book. I'm like, what's wrong with you, man? Why would you do that? Well, I get it. Tension is uncomfortable. Tension, that anxiety, that not knowing, are we going to make it or not? Are we going to cut it or not? And when you see that in a movie, it resonates with you about things in your life as well. And it's one thing when you're watching a movie, you could skip ahead. You could Google the ending. You could find out how it ends, and you could relieve that tension for yourself. My wife knows. But what happens when the story you're engaged in isn't a movie at all? When it's not a book? When you can't Google the ending because it's the story of your life? And you're in the middle of something crazy, and you're wondering, are we going to make it? Is God going to come through? Is he going to live? Is he going to die? Is he going to come home? That's the stories that we live in. That's the tension we deal with. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. We're in a series called Reclaimed. Your story matters. What do you do when the tension is so great in your life? You're not sure what's going to happen. I have great news for you. Today I want to open up to you this holy book. I'm blown away. Every time I read it, every time I dive deeper into God's Word, into the Bible, it blows me away. We're in the book of Ruth. It's a small book in the beginning of the Bible, in the Old Testament, from a story from thousands and thousands of years ago. And we're going to see the story of a woman named Ruth. And really, this isn't a story about Ruth at all. In fact, none of the stories in the Bible are about those people at all. Really, they're stories about God. And when you open the Bible, when you read a story, you need to start asking yourself a couple of questions. You need to ask, what does this tell me about God? What do I learn about humanity? What do I learn about the followers of God? And what do I learn about myself? And as we read Ruth's story, we find an incredible story of a woman who had all the odds stacked against her. It would seem that the arc of her story had come to an abrupt end with no real hope in sight. However, God was not finished with her story yet. And you're going to be glad that you came today. You're going to be glad that you're hearing this message, because it's an incredible story of redemption and healing from loss and finding purpose. And as we read the story, you're going to find yourself in there somewhere. And one of these characters, and one of these steps, and one of these moments. And what I'm so excited about is that we learn from this first chapter in the book of Ruth that your new beginning is closer than you think. We're going to talk about when it looks like everything is going wrong and there's no hope, and you're saying, am I going to make it? In fact, in that moment, God has a new beginning for you. Are you interested? All right, then I want you to pray with me. Ready? Father, speak to my life. I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to go to the next level, and I need a new beginning. I make myself available, and I'm willing to do whatever you say. In Jesus' name, if you prayed it with me, say amen. The book of Ruth, chapter 1, I'm going to read through it verse by verse and pull out some applications I believe are going to be very relevant for where you sit today. We're going to go right into it, and we're going to talk about your new beginning. And the first thing we're going to learn about your new beginning is that your new beginning, if you're taking notes, write it down, it comes after a dramatic ending. Verse 1, chapter 1 says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land." Every good story sets a context. Every good story gives a time period in an area. And it sets the tone. And the tone that's being set in this story is a very difficult one. It says, "When in the days when the judges ruled," or in the days in Hebrew it says, "when the judges judged." You might be thinking, what does that mean? Well, the judges, this was a very dangerous and tumultuous period for God's people. After Joshua led them into the promised land, there was no king in the land. And it became basically like the Wild West of Israel. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. There was no national leadership or rule. And so there was 400 years of these cycles of God's people serving God, loving God, enjoying the benefits of God, and then turning away from God and doing their own thing and rebelling, and then suffering the rebuke of God, and then repenting to God and crying out for help, and God sending help, and then them feeling satisfied and doing it all over again. Sound familiar? All over again, cycle after cycle. And if you read the book of Judges, you start to get angry with God's people, and you're like, what's wrong with you? And then you start saying, wow, I'm kind of just like that. You know, I follow God and get the blessings, and then I do my own thing, and I suffer the consequences, and I cry out to God. This was a difficult time. This is the time when this story takes place. The next thing in verse 1 tells us about this time was that there was a famine. A famine. Not many of us really comprehend the depths of what that means, especially if you grew up in America. Maybe if you grew up in another country, or you grew up in a difficult place, you might have the beginning grasp of what that means. I think about my wife's mother who grew up in Mexico, and 2 of her siblings died of starvation as young kids because they did not have enough food. Not some crazy disease, they just did not have enough food. This was one of the most serious, severe, and desperate things that could happen to a people, is to have a famine. Famine meant there was no rain, there was no crops, there was no food, there was no life. And I want to tell you, things get crazy when people's human needs stop being met. It reminds me of probably the closest time I could remember feeling anything close to this was during the right after the hurricane of Katrina in 2005. New Life rallied up in Chicago. We filled up semis, 10 semis filled with food, and sent them down. And with the very first load, we sent a small group to go with. So I went with a couple of our interns, a couple of our people from the church here. We went down in a 15-passenger van, and we followed the semi all the way down to where the storm was the worst, and you could see just houses wiped off of the face of the shore. You could see clothes everywhere and trees. And we came to this parking lot, and people began to come out of all these little corners with this semi when they found out that we had food, and we began to hand out food. There was no gasoline. There was no electricity. There was no refrigeration. There was nothing. And people began to swarm around us. And I remember how scared I was getting there because there was no gas stations. Gas was gone. I mean, station after station after station on the expressway was closed. And we got there, and people were surrounding us, and we were handing out food. And I had one gas can left to get our van back up. And I really didn't think we were going to make it. I remember arguing with some of the guys in the van who wanted to keep the air conditioning on. And I was driving, and I was like, shut it off. And like, we're dying back here. And I'm like, we're going to get stranded on the side of the road. Shut it off. We need every ounce of gas. And I pulled out the gas can to go on our way back, and I began to pour it into our tank, which was already down like to a quarter of a tank. And people began to see the gas, and they didn't have any gas. They were stuck. They couldn't get out. They had cars maybe, but no gas. And so I saw one guy walk around me with his kid, this little kid, a couple times. Walked around me, and then he said, hey, man, let's get a little bit of that gas. He goes, I got a family, like we need to get up out of here. I said, I'm sorry, this is all I've got. We can't get back up if we don't have this gas. We got to go back up and send you guys some more food. And he said, come on, man, just a little bit. Just give me a little bit. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have enough to get us out of here. I don't even think we're going to get out of here with this much. And he started getting louder. And he said, man, this guy's got gas and he doesn't want to give any to us. This guy wants to hog all of his gas. And people started to press in. And he pressed into me. And I remember at that moment thinking like, man, anything could happen out here. People are desperate for their lives. They're desperate for their families. And if it wasn't for armed Cook County sheriffs that were with us, I'm pretty sure that would have ended up really bad. And so the Cook County sheriffs pressed in and we made our way back out. But that's what it looks like in famine. It's a tough spot. And we find these characters in the middle of a famine. And they need to figure out what they're going to do. And so verse 1 says, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a time in the country of Moab. So you've got this family. It's a dad, a wife, 2 sons. They're in this very difficult time, the time of the judges, the time when the people of God kept rebelling against God and they were suffering because of it. God had sent famines on the land. God had sent things that were supposed to turn their hearts back to God. But instead, they just kept going through cycle after cycle. And so this man, he decided that instead of trying to stick it out there in the promised land, the place God had brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery, instead of turning to God for help and trying to make it, he said, well, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And I think there might be food in Moab. Let's talk about Moab because it doesn't mean anything to you right now. But Moab was just across the Dead Sea from Israel. And because of its geographic location and its elevation, it got more rain. And so it seemed like a place that was going to have more food. And so it made a lot of sense for this man to take his family to that place. Except for this one thing. Moab was the sworn enemy of Israel. Moab was a place that you did not go. And going there with his family was like slapping God in the face and slapping his people in the face and abandoning the promised land to live in Moab. Moab's roots came from an ancestral relationship between Abraham's nephew Lot and Lot's daughter. This stuff is in the Bible. It was a difficult time. Abraham's nephew Lot, his wife died, and he had 2 daughters. And the daughters basically said, we got to keep our line going. And they got their father drunk and basically raped him. Got pregnant, and this is in the Bible, Judge, it's in there, check it out. And the first daughter's son was named Moab. And he was the leader of that nation. And it became a dark nation. A place that hated God, hated the Israelites. In fact, they hated Israel so much that when Israel was escaping out of slavery and they passed through and they said, Moab, please just help us a little bit. They said, we're not helping you. Go on. Moab tried to curse Israel through a guy named Balaam. And they tried to ensnare Israel through sexual entanglement. They said, if that's not going to work, then let's try whatever we can. Moab was a nation that worshipped a false god named Chemosh. And they would do these dark rituals where they would worship him through child sacrifice. It was an evil, demonic nation. Hated God, hated God's people. And God had given them many laws telling them, don't go there, don't live there. Those people are not supposed to be in the house of God. Don't worship their gods. Don't be distracted by them. Let me ask you, who would dare to take his family out of the promised blessed land of God into the land of Moab? Who would compromise so greatly? He could have, in that moment, he could have said, family, we love God. We trust God. He's going to provide for us. We're not going to compromise. Who would do such a thing? Verse 2 tells us. The man's name was Elimelech. Ironically enough, his name means God is my king. But God was not his king. And his wife's name was Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. That's the scene. It's a scene of people doing whatever they felt they needed to do when God wasn't taking care of them, when following him wasn't satisfying them, to step outside of his bounds and to go to a new place. And verse 3 is going to tell us, remember, your new beginning ends with a dramatic ending, and I want to show you the dramatic ending. From verse 3 to verse 5, you're going to see 3 dramatic, difficult things that entered into Naomi's life. It says, verse 3, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Doesn't say he got in a bar fight. Doesn't say he got sick. Doesn't tell us how he died because the story's not about him. The point is, Naomi is now left without a husband. It says she was left with her 2 sons. That's the first bad thing. The second bad thing, it says they married Moabite women. One named Orpah and the other named Ruth. You say, what's the big deal with that, Pastor Joshua? Didn't you marry a Mexican woman? You're a white guy. Is it bad to marry people? Yeah. Let me just tell you. My Mexican wife loves Jesus, and we worship the same God. So you can marry anybody who worships the same God. You might have been wondering. But see, God had set up some rules for them, and he said, if you intermarry with these people, you're going to get pulled into their worship. You're going to worship their God. You're going to compromise on spiritual things. And so it wasn't just a relational issue. It was a worship issue. It was a spiritual issue. It went to the core of them. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, he said, no Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even to the 10th generation. He's saying, these people are godless. They hate me, they hate you, and you are not to intermingle with them. They're bad company. And yet, Naomi's 2 daughters-in-law were Moabites. Her sons married in. That was a moment that she could have said, my husband Elimelech didn't lead us in the right way. He took us out of God's will, out into this place. It's time. He's dead. It's time for us to go back, son. There's stories in the scripture of when it was time to get married, they would go back and make sure they were marrying from people who loved God and were going to serve God. And she didn't do that. That's the second bad thing that happened. And here's the third thing. It says, after that, they lived there about 10 years. Verse 5, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And so Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. It's like the storyteller saying, dun, dun, dun. Walked outside of God's favor. The man died. The 2 sons died. And now this Israelite woman is linked up with these 2 Moabite daughters-in-law in a time of famine. This was lower than low. This was a time when women had no rights, no voice, no ability to provide for themselves. And so being a widow was putting you at the bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder. And within 3 verses, Naomi had 3 horrible life tragedies occur. Her husband died, her sons died, and they were married. Now she's linked up with these Moabite women. And I want to tell you, friends, this dramatic ending is the fertile soil for her new beginning. You may be sitting there today and you say, oh, I can relate to Naomi because I feel like God's abandoned me and maybe I've abandoned him and I've had problems in each of my relationships and I'm struggling today and I'm in one of those moments like you and your wife where you're sitting there watching the TV saying, I don't know if I'm going to make it. But it's not a movie. It's my real life. Today you need to hear about a God who takes the most difficult, darkest endings and brings brand new beginnings out of them. This is how it starts, but it's not how it finishes. You can get excited about that. If you've experienced a dramatic ending, then I want you to know something. You're in the exact, precise, right spot to start your new beginning. But please don't think it's just going to happen to you. New beginnings don't just happen to you. And that leads us to our second point. Your new beginning starts with a first step. It starts with a step. It starts with a decision. Let's look at how Naomi's new beginning started. How did she reach this decision? Verse 6. When Naomi heard, somebody say Naomi heard. See, that's where it began. She heard something. Something that led her to make a decision that led her to a first step. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home. Say, return home. She heard something that made her decide she needed a change in her life. She was going to return home. That word return is used many, many times in this first chapter. It's a key word. Verse 7 says, with her 2 daughters-in-law, listen to this, listen. She left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah, back to God. She left the place she had been living. Naomi heard something. She heard that God was moving among the people. His people, not in Moab, but back in Jerusalem. Somebody must have told her. I don't know how she got the news. There was no internet. There was no newspaper. There was no telephone. Somebody passed along the story. Hey, did you hear what's going on in Israel? They have food again. God's blessing them again. His favor is shining again. The seasons are changing. There's a new beginning there. And this news stirred Naomi. It caused her to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a new beginning too, if she would go back home, back to God's place with God's people. Her new beginning required something. It was called faith. And the scriptures tell us that faith comes by hearing the word of Christ. Faith is not something you stir up. Faith is not something you create. If you're stuck, you don't say, I need more faith. I'm going to make more faith. Faith. Pray, faith. Scriptures tell us in Ephesians chapter 2 that faith is a gift that comes from God. In Romans, we learn that faith comes from hearing. She heard a message of good news. She heard a story that led her to believe that possibly, maybe, just maybe, she could have a new beginning. Maybe God would show favor on her. And that belief led her to do something. It led her to take a first step. And I want to tell you, if you're waiting for your new beginning, but you're not willing to take your first step, you can just keep waiting. But there's a message you need to hear, like Naomi heard that day. A message about a God who loves his people even when they sin against him. A message about a God who sees through the crevices of your soul, to the darkness that you live with, to the dirty, shameful, nasty things that you think God would never want you. He sees into that. He knows your attitudes. He knows your actions. He knows where you've been. He knows where you're going. And he loves you. And he's strong enough to save you. That's the good news. We have evidence of this, of course, in the person of Jesus, the Son of God, who came down to this dirty earth to walk the dirty streets and be treated like a dirty sinner, to die on a dirty cross for a dirty person like you and me, who died and 3 days later rose again, paying for all of our sin, all the nasty, sinful things that Naomi did, all the nasty, sinful things that Elimelech did, that Kilion did, that Mahlon did, that Ruth did, that you did. And he rose again, and he's coming back. That's the good news. Now, if you believe that, then you have an opportunity to step into a new beginning. But it's going to require a step. I want you to see this. I think a lot of us are hearing about good things happening around us, and we've walked away from God. We've stepped outside of God's blessing flow. We're living in Moab, and we're saying, "Oh, favor of God, come this way. Meet me out here in Moab. Meet me in my compromise. Meet me where I don't take any change or any step. Come and bless me in Moab, God." And God says, "No, Mo. No, Mo, you want a new beginning? I got a new beginning for you, but it starts with the first step." And I want you to see that Naomi came to believe that. Because verse 7 says she left the place she had been living. She left the place she had grown accustomed to, the place she had grown comfortable with. It was a decade. It was 10 years. Going back to Israel was not going to be easy. There was no bus, there was no car, there was no train. She was going to take a trek through the wilderness. And when she got home, she knew what she would experience. The scorn of her whole town. There's Naomi. She left us. She left God. She went out to the Moabites. And here she is without her husband or her sons. And these Moabite women, she would be a disgrace. And yet she knew God was her only hope. And so she was willing to take a step to leave the place she had been living and set out on the road that would take her back home. Do you think there's an application there for you? The place where you have been living? God speaks to us. His good news reaches us. The message comes all the way to Moab and beckons you and calls you and offers you to take a step, to get on the road, to leave behind the place you have been living and get on the road to go back to the place of God's favor and the place of God's blessing. This is not just for the people in the Old Testament. This is for the people of God who follow Jesus. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Come all, come one and come all. The option is there for you. But he said, if you would come with me, anybody who wants to come with me must pick up his cross daily and follow me. The good news comes in Moab, but you can't stay in Moab and experience it. You need to take a journey. And I wonder if you've heard something today or recently that makes you believe that maybe things could be different for you. Maybe God could do a work in your life. Maybe you're not too far gone. Maybe you're not worthless. Maybe the message you've been hearing for a long time is that there is no good in your life anymore. You might as well just give up. You might as well just end it all. You might as well just let go of your family. You might as well just let go of yourself. You might as well just go ahead with that guy because there is no godly man who's going to be there for you anyway. You might as well just go with that girl. You might as well just leave your family. You might as well just go where at least there's the little bit of relief in Moab. But you heard about a God who blesses his people. And maybe today you're willing to say, it's time for me to take a step. To take a step. What's your first step? You know, it's one thing to hear a message from the Bible or to come to church and feel inspired. I hope you do. I do. But inspiration is not enough. Your inspiration needs to lead to a motivation that will eventually bring you transformation. You need to get that word and make a decision to take a step. How long will you sit there watching other people enjoy God? How long will you stay in Moab, in your compromise, feeling like you're too far gone? I've got news for you. You're not too far gone. The blood of Jesus that was shed on the cross is good for you. It's good for you. It's effective. It can work in your life. It can wash you clean. So leave the place where you've been living and get on the road that's going to take you home. If you don't know what your first step is, I want to tell you, you don't have to get it right to get started. Some of you are procrastinating. I mean, you are putting it off. Well, I'll do it when I hear from so-and-so, or when I know I should do it, but I'm waiting for God to really, really speak to me. Like maybe I'll hear an audible voice when I go to the altar, or if I go and I talk to somebody, they'll say something that will trigger that. And then I'll go, and then I'll know. Or, once we get more money, then I can make that move. Or I can't step out now. I know I really shouldn't be living with this guy. It's bad. He hates God. And every time we're together, we're doing stuff we shouldn't be doing. But when I get a promotion, then I'll move out. And I just want to tell you, you don't have to get it right to get started, but you have to get started to get it right. Take a step. Take a step. Take a step towards God. If you don't know what that is, if it's not clear to you, I'll tell you one step you can take. In a minute, when we wrap this up into a moment of decision, you can come to this altar and you can get on your knees and you can say, God, here I am. I need you to speak to me. I need you to work in my life. I'm willing to follow you. Just help me. You could do a physical act that tells your heart, I'm following God. Third and finally, your new beginning is sealed with a defining moment. It starts with the first step, but it's sealed with a defining moment. Now the story moves from Naomi over to Ruth, and we see this Moabite woman. We see that she surprises us in so many ways for the godly character and the faith and the courage that she has. She's an example to all of us. She's a leader who God would use in mighty ways throughout the centuries, but it began with a defining moment. Here it is. Verse 8. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back, each of you. Remember they got on the road? She was on her way back, and as they were walking, she's like, you know what? On second thought, ladies, on second thought, probably it wouldn't be a good idea for you to come with me. And there's a lot of reasons why, and she goes on to list them. Some of them. Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant each of you would find rest in the home of another husband. Like, go start over. Go with somebody else. Go back to your people. Don't come with me. There's nothing that I have to offer you. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud. And they said to her, no, we're going to go with you to your people. Verse 11, but Naomi said, go home, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? See, in those days, if a woman was married to a man and he died, his brother had the responsibility of providing children for that wife for his brother. And she would be provided for, and she would be taken care of, and she would stay in the family, and she would have, that was how she would make it. But Naomi's saying to her, I don't have any more kids. Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I had sons tonight, would you wait till they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than it is for you, because the Lord's hand is against me. And at this, they wept aloud together. And then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. So here's Orpah. She's a good wife. She fulfills her wifely duties. She was faithful to her husband. She was faithful to her mother-in-law. She was even willing to go take care of her. She was released from that burden, and she went back, and there was nothing wrong with that. But you see a different spirit in Ruth. You see something else. What happens? It says Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. You know, Naomi, we're not really sure where her theology was. She really struggled. She did. She really struggled. She thought God was against her, that there was no hope for her. She could have brought her daughters-in-law and said, here, let's follow God. She was probably more like a nominal believer. Somebody who kind of believes in God but doesn't really know why, isn't really motivated and convicted by those convictions. And so she says, go worship those other gods. Go back to those gods and go back to those people. But Ruth replied, watch Ruth's response here. Watch what's happening. There's something special happening here. Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. For where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be your people, and your what? Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized Ruth was determined, what was she? Determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Ruth had made up her mind. This was Ruth's defining moment. This was the moment that shaped every other moment for the rest of her life. And to not give you too much of a spoiler, but Ruth lives on in the scriptures. Ruth, the book of Ruth, is the only Old Testament book with the name of a non-Jewish person. Ruth is one of the people in the line of Jesus. She would go on to become the great-grandmother of the great King David. And through David to become the great-grandmother of Jesus. And her story has changed history. And through Ruth, when you put your faith in Jesus, you're now connected through that bloodline. Pretty powerful stuff. I don't think she realized what was at stake in that moment. When her and Orpah were making decisions on what to do and where to go, Orpah didn't do anything wrong, but Ruth did something incredibly better. She bound herself to God, the true God, the living God. She stood at the fork in the road and chose a direction that seemed it would cost her dearly. For if she were to go back to Israel, she would be treated like a dirty woman. She would be treated like a seductress, like those Moabite women. She would be treated like a scandalous, godless woman. And on top of it, she was a widow, living with another widow. Who has time for that? But she chose to make God her God. I'm going to tell you that your new beginning demands a defining moment in your life too. Where you declare, this is who I am and this is where I stand. And this is the line I cross and I will not go back. And don't try to dissuade me. Come what may, let the chips fall where they may. Think about me what you may. Say about me what you may. I'm following God. This is who I am. I wonder if you've had a defining moment like that, where you've said to the world, I am a Jesus follower. He's my number one. He's my shot caller. He's my jefe. He's my Lord. He's my Savior. What He says goes. And if I have to follow Him and please Him or choose you, I'm choosing Him every time. And if you don't want to be my girlfriend anymore, God bless you, sweetheart. And if you don't want to be my family member anymore, it hurts, but I'm with Him. See, what Ruth was saying was more than a confession. It was more than a commitment. It was a conversion. Do you realize that? She was converting. Now, it might have happened sometime before that, but this was the declaration. Kind of like baptism, isn't it? You don't get saved when you get baptized, but you get baptized because you're saved. Baptism doesn't make you new, but because you're new, you get baptized. Baptism is the symbol, it's the marker, it's the moment. It's the declaration to yourself and to the world and to the spirits around that I'm living for Jesus. Scriptures tell us that baptism represents your old life coming to an end and a new life beginning. That you go down into the waters like going down into death with Jesus. And you come up out of the waters like Jesus rose again to live a new life. Pretty powerful stuff. I wonder, have you had a moment like that? If you say, I follow God, I love Jesus, but I don't want to get baptized because it'll cause too much trouble in my family. I love Jesus, but I don't want to get baptized because my friends are going to think I've become an extremist. I love God and everything, and I want to follow Him, and I want His blessing, but I'd much rather have it over here in Moab. I don't really feel like I need one of those crazy defining moments. I want to tell you, Jesus would say otherwise. Jesus said to His followers, He said, go make disciples. Let them know the good news. Let them know that I will love them and accept them just as they are. Let them know that. And teach them to obey. To what? Obey. Ooh, Dad, I don't like that word. Do you like that word? Obey. Well, there it is, though. Jesus said, teach them to obey, to change their life, to take a step, to go in a new direction. Teach them that and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I'll be with you to the end of the age. Matthew chapter 28. And that is what happens when you become a follower of Jesus. And if you say, I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm trying to get God's blessing over here in Moab. I want to say, no more. No more. Give it to Him. Take the step in the new direction. Have your conversion moment. See, Ruth took on a new identity. She was saying, your people will become my people. Where you go, I will go. She makes a commitment deeper than what most people make in their wedding covenant. In our wedding covenant, we say, to love and the cherish, having a whole, death do us part, rich or poor, till death do us part. But Ruth didn't say that. Ruth said, listen, once you die, because she was older in age, I'm going to stay there and serve that God and love those people. And when I die, they're going to put me right next to you. Her commitment was longer than life and death. Her commitment was forever. And she took on a new identity. This is who I am. This is my identity. Don't try to talk me out of it, Naomi. Come what may, only death can change me. And it's this way with following Jesus. He offers a free, full, fresh start. But He calls you to follow Him on a new path. He calls you, like He was calling Naomi and Ruth in verse 7, to leave the place where you have been living and set out on the road that will take you back home. Are you ready to leave the place where you've been living? The place that you've been living, the secret place you've been living, the compromising place you've been living, the place you know if you would open up the Scriptures, God would say, no, don't live like that, but you've been doing it anyway, and you've got all your reasons, don't you? There's a famine, God. I've been praying for you to meet this need in my life for years, and still I'm thirsty. Still I'm hungry. So you know, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. But if you want a new beginning, you got to realize that your new beginning comes with a dramatic ending. And no matter how bad your ending is right now, it's the beginning of something fresh and new. If you'll, number two, take a step. Just take a step like they did because of your faith, because of your belief in God, of who He is and what He's called you to. And be willing to have your life marked by a defining moment. I want to tell you that if you have not been baptized, that is your defining moment. The moment when you claim allegiance to Jesus alone. Is that you? Do you need to take that step? Don't wait anymore. Don't sit here in Moab and know that there's a blessing in Israel and stay put. Be willing to call yourself out, to say, by God's grace, by God's strength, because of God's favor, I will follow Him and He will be my number one. And I'll be baptized as an evidence of my trust in Jesus and my allegiance to Jesus and my belief that He paid for my sins on His cross. And now I'm all for Him. Listen, if you need to take that step, I want to encourage you to do it. There's 2 baptisms coming up in 1 month. June 2nd, there's a baptism for everybody, men and women. June 16th, there's a baptism just for men on Father's Day. That's your defining moment. You can reach in front of you right now, pull out this card, check the baptism box, fill it out, and Tony Johnson's going to meet me at the front here in a moment, and he's going to give you a blue book to help you take your first steps. If that's you, you're saying, I'm taking that step in the next month, we'll walk with you. We'll get you a mentor. We'll help you take your first steps. We'll pray with you. We'll walk with you. You're not alone. And I know there's somebody in here who's going to take that step, and I'm excited for you. I took that step 20 years ago. So if God's tugging on your heart, go ahead and get ready. Go pull it out and get ready. I'm going to close by sharing a story about my engagement. Many of you know I married a beautiful Mexican woman that I met here at New Life. Changed my life forever. My life's changed in so many ways here. And she's a feisty lady. I love her. She's like the fire in my volcano, you know? She's like the spice in my rice. She's like the color in my picture. She's like the pico in my de gallo, you know? She's a fiery woman. She's a spicy lady. Praise the Lord. God knew I needed a woman like that. Well, the thing is, though, you know, she's real straightforward. And when we were dating, sometimes, quite often, she would get in the car, and I have a nice date plan and take her out to like a nice restaurant or something, and she'd sit down and she'd look at me and she'd go, "Are you going to propose tonight?" You're supposed to say. How do you win that? If you say yeah, it's like, oh, okay, it's ruined. And I'm like, no. And she's like, oh. I'm like, but we could have a great time. I mean, I got a nice date for you. Like, so she would do this over and over. So finally, when I was ready to propose, I got my mother's ring, the one my father gave her, turned it into white gold, embezzled some designs along it, took out the diamond, had it clean, put a new basket on it, bought some rubies, had them installed next to it because I said, you know, she's my diamond amongst rubies. Had that thing set up, had that ready, planned out. But here's the problem, though. She kept asking me if I was going to propose to her. I'm like, don't ruin it. I'm a romantic, all right? I want it to be special. I'm not going to be like, tonight I'm going to propose to you and like just wait for it. You know, every time I tie my shoe, was like, nope, not yet, you know. Let me take you on this adventure, woman. Well, the problem was she kept thinking that we were going to get engaged every night. So I had to do it in a way she would never expect it. So I set it all up. I was a youth pastor, and she knew every Friday night that I had to be at youth group, so I called in a favor, had somebody else leading youth group for me for that night, and then I drove past her house, and she was having a bad day. She had a fight with somebody. She was crying. She was in her sweats. You know, she was totally, like, not expecting to go out anywhere. And I said, hey, I happen to be in the neighborhood, and I'm not going to group tonight. I said, you want me to pick you up? She's like, yeah, pick me up. So I picked her up, and I said, well, what do you want to do? She's like, oh, I don't know. And I had a place picked out. I had this beautiful forest preserve I was going to take her to. It was October. All the leaves had turned golden yellow. There was a canopy of beautiful golden leaves on the top. The sun was coming through, lighting them up. There was like a carpet of beautiful yellow leaves on the bottom. It was perfect, but I couldn't let her know I was going there to propose to her, so I had to make it seem like an accident. So eventually I said, oh, what about that place? She's like, okay, I don't care. So we drove in there. I had my guitar with me. I'm like, how am I going to pull this off? You know? And I said, oh, maybe we could sing a worship song in the forest, you know? And so she's like, okay, whatever. So we get out there, I'm walking out there, you know, and it's beautiful. It's just like a fairy tale. It's gorgeous. And I'm like, oh man, she's going to know, she's going to know. So I had to keep putting her off of my scent, you know. So I said things like, you know, for the most part, you know, we've had a pretty good relationship throughout the years, but now I need to talk to you about our relationship. And she's like, huh? And then she's like, what? So she thought I was breaking up with her. So then she started like, she was really confused. She's like, why are we here? She's like, you know, and then I sang her the song. She's like, she thought I was breaking up with her, and I gave her a ring box, you know, and it didn't have the ring. The ring was in my pocket, and the ring box had the scripture. It said, you're like a diamond among rubies. And she's like, what's going on? She was so confused. And then I told her that, you know, I thought we had a good run. She's like, now she's crying. She's crying. She's confused. She's upset. I'm like, oh, pull up. And then finally I'm like, will you marry me? And she goes, yes. And then, yes. And she's jumping. And then there's a guy jogging, and he's like, whoa, what's going on over there? Like, mind your own business, buddy. The thing is, while she was confused, while she felt like it was so random, while she felt like there was no purpose or meaning, and she was even confused about our relationship, and she doubted whether or not I had a commitment that I would make to her, all the while, there was a shiny gold ring in my pocket with a diamond and 2 rubies. And a full commitment and preparation to love that woman and give her a new beginning and start a new future together. The whole time she cried. The whole time she was confused. The whole time she wondered if there could be anything good that could come out of this dark moment. There was. And I want to tell you, if you're struggling today in confusion, you've been wondering, could God love me? Could God bring any good out of this mess? Why am I even here? Does God even know about me? Could God ever forgive me? Could there be anything good that would come out of this? And you've struggled and you'd suffered all the while. God doesn't have in his pocket a ring. It's a cross with blood on it. A symbol of his undying love for you. The proof, the evidence that he does love you. Does God love me? Yes, he does. How do I know? Look at the cross.